Composer Michael Giacchino has worked on over 150 films. He's composed scores for Coco, Star Trek, and Pixar's Inside Out. This year, as you've just seen, he's composed the score for Taika Waititi's Jojo Rabbit. Oh my gosh, Michael.
So much room out here. I'm just trying to do this.
It's very
It's
cozy.
been a really long day, and I think since you've kind of just interviewed me on the screen, you already know the answers, so let's just hang out.
You get 5 minutes, Michael.
Oh, okay. I can sleep in 5 minutes. What do you want to know?
So, okay, one of the hardest things to do is to explain Jojo Rabbit to people, right?
Yeah?
What did Taika Waititi say to you when he said, I want you to do my next movie?
I think at that point he kind of figured out how to get it to be. He just said, would you just read this script? Because he didn't want to sit there and go, hey, do you want to do this movie I'm doing? It has Hitler, it's got a bunch of Nazi youth kids, and they're all really into Hitler. That's probably wouldn't have gone over very well. But although knowing him and his movies, I probably still would have said yes because I love what he does so much. There's always, no matter what it is, there's always this incredible center of heart in his films, So, and I knew whatever it was, I was going to do it because I was just happy that he called me.
So how did you crack the score for Jojo Rabbit?
Well, I think like in any movie, you are forced to kind of look at what it's doing to you. Any story, anything you read, a painting you see on the wall, a poem you read, or just something you might see outside, a flower. Like if you examine how those things make you feel, then you can, or I can write music. Like if I can, and it's really hard sometimes because it's like being an actor. You kind of have to take on these emotions. You have to take on all of these feelings. So this movie, while there was some very funny things in it, there was also some very incredibly hard things in the film. So you live with that all day as you're writing, and you take on those feelings, and you try to assume and understand what it would feel like to be in that position. And then once I'm there, then I can write music. If I find myself on a film or if I'm shown a film where I don't feel any of those things, I have to say no, because I can't. It's very hard to write music without that sort of emotional push for me.
So I love JoJo's theme and the evolution of that from the beginning when he's this narrow-minded 10-year-old.
Yeah.
By the end of the movie, he's changed. So how did you write that motif and talk about the evolution?
Well, it was about coming up with this idea that, I wanted something to feel childlike, but I also wanted it to be able to evolve and to become an adult, in a way. And I feel like through this movie, his whole journey is about, little by little opening his worldview. Because clearly in the very beginning, it's a very narrow point of view that he has. He only sees what's really in front of him, and all of the lies that have been told to him, he has just taken them all in as truth. And over time, you start to understand, oh wait, those things that people are saying to me may not be true. And then you start going, wait, those things people are saying to me definitely are not true. And then you start going, what do I do about that? And I feel like this movie is so important right now in this world, because that is exactly what's happening. People are using their words to do terrible things. You can use guns to do terrible things. You can use, machines and all of that, but you can also use words to do terrible things. And there are people, all over our, worldview right now that are doing that in the most awful, despicable ways. And I feel like this movie is an important film to see because it speaks out against just that kind of a thing.
Amazing. And Rosie's theme, JoJo's mother, is so beautiful. Talk about creating her motif.
Yeah, she's an incredibly sort of complicated character. She has this life she has to balance between her secret life and then her life at home with JoJo, and she has to keep as much of that away from him as possible. So again, I just wanted something as simple, simple, simple. And, her theme is really played first just on a harp. That's it, just one instrument. And I think throughout the movie, it's mostly played on very, very small amount of instruments. I feel like it's like, when you're choosing instrumentation for how you're going to perform a piece of music, it's very important to also think about the emotions that are underlying it. If you think about it, if a friend of yours was hurting in some way, they were going through some tough time, and you sat down with them to sort of console them, you wouldn't console them by yelling at them. You're not going to be like, I can't believe you're feeling this way. Oh my God, this is, you're not going to do that. You're going to be very gentle, you're going to be very quiet. And I notice a lot of times in movies, there's a tendency, to get people to feel something, we'll just be as big as we can with the music. And I tend to feel like if you go the opposite way, that feels more truthful. And you also then leave room for the actors to do their thing as well. I'm always looking at what they're giving me. And in many cases, all I need to do is one note. And those two things working together really kind of pull you in. So a lot of this movie, including Rosie and all of it, was really built around those sort of, that practice of writing it that way.
So usually you're working with an orchestra of like 100-piece orchestra, right? So for this one was a lot smaller. How did that affect your work, or talk about that? Well,
it's always harder when you're in a box, right? And and a lot of the movies that I do, there's no box. They're like, well, what do you want? 5,000 pieces. Oh, great, you got it. Okay, and then you're off doing, some giant movie like that. But I do love those times when it's like, okay, you have a very limited budget, and you have you have to creatively think about how you're going to support the film in the best way possible. And this movie would not have worked with a 100-piece orchestra. It just would not have worked, in my opinion. And we had, I think, 24, 25 people in the orchestra. It was a very small group, and made up with like a string quartet and a harpsichord at times, and a piano or a guitar, an acoustic guitar. And we had recorders, it was like a very odd grouping of things. But it worked really nicely, and I love working in those things. It reminds me more of like when I was a kid, and I used to make these Super 8 movies and stop motion animation all my life. And you had these boxes to work within, and whatever I couldn't go out and buy anything. We didn't have money, so I would just go around the house and use whatever I could. Okay, there's a squirrel nutcracker on my mom's thing. I'm going to use that as the monster that is attacking, my Buck Rogers action figure that I got for Easter. I'm very lucky, and those kinds of things. So you find ways to make it work, and it really does force you to be more creative that way, I think.
Talk about, how did you land on the butterfly motif for Rosie? We can't spoil it because I think there are people here who haven't yet seen the movie. Ooh.
That's the most difficult scene in the film. It's the most, that's the part in the film where everything changes for him. And I feel like we did do that a couple times. But it was more about like what was the right tempo, and what was the right, how simple could we be without overstaying our welcome. There was a lot of work went into that, not just with what I was doing, but I know that even editorially, they were cutting that scene a bunch of different times just to see how it could work in different ways, and you always have another idea, and the only thing that stops you is the fact that you have a schedule and you're done. But that was the scene probably we worked on the most, at least, in terms of just getting it just right. Because if it was just one frame off, it would not have worked. It was one of those scenes. Sometimes you can get away with that, but this was a scene where everything needed timing-wise to be like just perfect. And there were shots put in, shots taken out, this and that. All kinds of things were tried just to get it to where we thought it worked best.
Yeah. And the opening with the German version of "I Want to Hold Your Hand" by the Beatles. Talk about how that happened, because that is an amazing. Yeah. I didn't even know that existed.
Well, yeah, I remember the first time I saw the film, it had that in it, and I thought, wow, what a brilliant way to open this movie. They're using the German version of the Beatles singing "I Want to Hold Your Hand," and it's against all this footage of Jojo running through the town in his Nazi youth uniform, and of all, it's archival footage. It's an incredible little montage for the opening. So I, at one point, asked him, I was like, wow, so how did you get that cleared for this? And he was like, oh, we haven't got it cleared yet. And I was like, well, what are you going to do if you can't clear it? And he's like, oh, you're our plan B. And I was like, I can't write anything that's going to be as good as this. You have to clear. So I had, several years ago, I had worked with Paul McCartney on a project that he was doing. And we had a great time, and I've kept in touch with him. So I said, I could call him and ask him if there's any help, because they weren't getting any answer back. You can imagine, we want to use this in our Hitler movie. So I said, let me give him a call. So I gave him a call. I explained what it was, and he thought that it sounded fascinating, and he was like, you know what? Just let me get my guy on it, and they'll give you a call, and we'll get it all taken care of. And literally the next morning, someone from Apple Corps called me and said, okay, Paul told us to take care of whatever it is you need, so what do you need? So I'm like, okay, we need that song cleared, first of all. So we set up screenings for the different parties involved, because it's not just Paul. You have Yoko and you have Olivia, and so everyone's sort of estate has to be on board with it. So that all happened, and thankfully that went great. Because I knew if they just saw the movie, they'd be so into it. Because you can imagine, this is exactly the kind of movies the Beatles would have loved to have made. You know what I mean? It would have been right up their alley. So I was very happy that worked out. So that song, we got that cleared, and that all worked out. So yeah, there you go.
All right, you can take a nap. I'm going to introduce the next clip.